All right, can we start with a prayer? Lord, it's good to be together. It's for all the fellowship and the support and friendship and all the prayers. Thank you for this blessing here. Thank you for Isaiah as well. For this is powerful stuff, Lord. You have given us a gift here that just keeps on giving. We thank you for it. So bless us as we continue now with Isaiah and talk about his call. We pray this in the name of Jesus Christ, who is Lord and Savior. Amen. Amen. Okay, folks, I'd like to thank you, folks, for all your prayers and for your help. It's a great blessing to know that in difficult times you're not alone. So, okay, today we're going to look at the call of Isaiah, which is Isaiah 6. This is the first time we're going to get into it. But before we do that, I want to share something here. This right here is the what they call the Great Isaiah Scroll. You can see this is about 40 feet long here. This is found in Qumran, which is where the Dead Sea is. I have a paper copy of this. I'll pass this around. This will also be in my email. But this is the Romans came through after in 70 AD and just destroyed Jerusalem, and they continued their march by traveling to the south along the shore of the Dead Sea. They eventually ended up in Masada. But when going through, they destroyed a community called Qumran. This is a community, we believe, of Essenes. It's one of the sects of Judaism. We don't see about it much in the Bible because it was they were all in a single community by themselves. So so they came through, and these Essenes were a community that was formed probably around 100 BC. They fled from standard Judaism because they weren't doing it right. That's familiar. So they had this very tight, very well organized community, and they did a lot of scrolls. They copied the Bible. They copied all kinds of texts. There are, and before the Romans came through, they took these scrolls and put them in jars and sealed them and put them in caves. And these were discovered in 1946. Wow. These are what are called the Dead Sea Scrolls. Every book in the Bible is represented in there except Esther. Now, most of it is in little pieces and fragments. It's all just very small parts of it. One of the most extraordinary scroll is this one. This is Isaiah. It's the entire book of Isaiah. Wow. That's about 40 feet long. It's on display in a museum in Jerusalem, the Museum of the Scrolls, I think that's what it is. And one of it's probably dated about 200 BC, the text. Wow. This is probably when it was copied. This is another version of that. Amazing thing about this, really amazing thing about this is that when we read this scroll, and scholars read it, they found that it is almost identical to the scroll, to the copies of the old Isaiah, the book of Isaiah that we have in common use. Now these, at least the Hebrew ones, these we have some dating to 500. Most of the ones we have are dated 900 or so, and the authoritative ones that we usually use come from about 900,000.
From the Greek?
Pardon me?
From the Greek?
No, this is from the Hebrew. The Greeks, we have earlier texts from the Greek.
900 BC, right?
900 AD.
AD, okay.
900 AD. Understand now that this is 1100 years before the text that we commonly use. The Hebrew text that we commonly
So what you're saying is they matched up.
use. Pardon me?
They
They
matched up.
And that's extraordinary. Understanding they're copying these by hand. They will I think I've got. I think I'm gonna admit all.
Yeah, just
There we
pressing
go.
on the hyphen, yeah.
She's, okay, that means that this copying process is so elaborate. It can be remarkably accurate, absolutely remarkably accurate. Here's, let me give you the, another copy that I just passed around. This copy here, these are the individual panels, and these are what they look like close up. This one right here is an even closer look, and this is from Isaiah 61. This is what Jesus read in the synagogue. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he identified this part right here.
Wow.
So this is the great, what they call it, the great Isaiah scroll. And it is great. It's really quite extraordinary. So, okay.
Go over those two dates again. for the-
Okay, the 70 AD is when the Romans came through.
Right,
The Qumran community was probably formed around 100 BC.
okay,
And we think this scroll was copied sometime around 200 BC.
okay.
And it was maybe 100 BC, whatever. It's 1,000 years at least earlier than the text that we standard use ordinarily.
And how did we get the current Isaiah that we use today?
Okay, there are two main texts, one that was preserved in Moscow and another in the Vatican, I believe. These are the ones that have been used by scholars from the time we really started translating the Bible from the original Hebrew. And they date to around 900 AD.
Okay,
And they're different in that they're pointed text. That scroll right there does not have any vowels on it. Hebrew is only has consonants. The ones the master reads put vowels in. They pointed the text around 500 AD, and all the texts that we have that we use are pointed texts. So that Isaiah text that I just passed around is not being seen here.
Your camera's up, your camera's off.
That text is
You Xed out your
You did
camera
Your camera's off
down below,
On the left.
down below. There you go.
here.
start
Right there.
video. Good idea. Good idea.
There you go.
So that's the antiquity of this text is extraordinary, and what we'll see when we get down to the when we get into it, we'll see some footnotes when the New Revised Standard Version has footnotes, annotations where there are variances in the text. And we'll see a lot of them that come from where the source of is this great Isaiah scroll. And I'll point them out to you when we get to that. Yes,
Would you say it's almost miraculous that it's that accurate?
I think it's an extraordinary, miraculous. I don't think so. I don't think it's a miracle. I think it's an extraordinary credit, testimony to the faithfulness of those folks who have copied these texts over the years. The New Testament is the same way. This was copied, of course, by hand from 1,000 years or more. So,
That means the New Revised Standard Version is not taking that manuscript as the main one?
well,
Or
they just have this, the regular one, and they update it with textual annotations from the Great Isaiah Scroll. Okay, let me read. This is from Isaiah 6. Okay, we're going to read the whole chapter. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe was filled the temple. Seraphs were in attendance above him. Each had 6 wings. With 2 they covered their faces, and with 2 they covered their feet, and with 2 they flew. And one called to another and said, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory." The pivots on the thresholds shook at the voices of those who called, and the house filled with smoke. And I said, "Woe is me, for I am lost, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I have lived among a people of unclean lips. Yet my eyes have seen the King, the Lord of hosts." Then one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal that had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. The seraph touched my mouth with it and said, now that this has touched your lips, your guilt has departed and your sin is blotted out. And then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, "Who shall I send, and who will go for us?" And I said, "Here am I, send me." And he said, "Go and say to this people, keep listening, but do not comprehend. Keep looking, but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull and stop their ears and shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn and be healed." And then I said, "How long, O Lord?" And he said, "Until cities lie waste without inhabitant, and houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land. Even if a 10th part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth on an oak, whose stump remains standing when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump."
And what version are you reading?
I'm reading from the New Revised Standard Version.
Okay.
This one.
If the
There's
dish,
only a few.
The RSV,
The RSV is a little different, that's right,
and it uses heart where
mine.
you say mind.
Yes, the term heart in Hebrew and also in Greek really doesn't mean the heart that we think of as, this kind of thing. It's the cognitive import of it. Yes. Okay. Let me start here. The year King Uzziah died. First of all, Uzziah is called Azariah if you're reading Kings, First Kings. And that is probably 742 to 730, either 742 or 733. 742 is probably the preferred time. He said, "I saw sitting on the throne, high and lofty, I saw the Lord sitting on the throne, high and lofty, and the hem of his robe filled his temple. Let's talk about this for a second. This is the call of Isaiah. It's a common kind of event. Now, what we're going to have here is the where's my plus?
Right above the arrows,
Right above the arrow.
left one box. There you go.
There it is, yeah. Thank you. This is the call of Jeremiah. You can see there's some similarities. The word of the Lord came to him, and this is where he said, I formed you in my womb. And I called you, from that time on, I've called you to be a prophet. And to him, and Jeremiah objects, just like Isaiah does. And he says, to whomever I send you, you shall go. Whatever I command, you shall speak. Don't be afraid of them. And Jeremiah got thrown up, ended up in jail, and was really under threat. For I am the Lord, for I am with you to deliver you. And this is oracle of the Lord here. This is we'll see some of this in Isaiah in the New Revised Standard Version. This is a statement that says, thus saith the Lord. It's frequently done that way. This is a clarification that these are the words of God that are coming out of Jeremiah's mouth. And the Lord extended his hand and touched my mouth, saying, see, I placed my words in your mouth. Today I appointed you over nations and kingdoms to uproot and tear down. That's the similar kind of thing that we see here in Isaiah. It's a call, and it is it specifies better than Isaiah does that God is putting these words into Jeremiah's, Isaiah's mouth.
The,
Yes,
that section where God is telling Jeremiah that he is gonna reveal the words of the Lord, does that come to Jeremiah? Or
yes.
does someone else say it first to appoint Jeremiah to that role?
Well, here's what happens is that God speaks to Jeremiah, right? And it's describing this here. Jeremiah turns to the people and says, this is the oracle of the Lord. These are God's words, which is to say, thus saith the Lord, yada, 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 yada.
Even the part that gives Jeremiah the power to.
Yes.
Oh,
And God has actually given them the words. These are not speculations. In this particular case, God is in this vision is in the temple. He was in the temple, and the hem of his robe, God, the Lord was sitting on his throne, and the hem of his robe filled the temple. Okay, people of great rapport, people of great power in the ancient world would have hems on their robes, and sometimes with fringes on them. And the size of the hem is an indicator of how important they were. The size of the hem of God's robe is such that it filled the whole temple. He was a big guy. And it notes it filled the temple. You know. I want to talk about the temple. What a temple was. Not a church. N.T. Wright, who's a New Testament scholar, talks about the temple as being where heaven and earth kind of intersect. See, it's a spot where heaven and earth intersect. And that's a really good description of what's going on here. The temple was a building built to exact specifications. You can see the specifications if you read 1 Kings 12. If you read 1 Kings 12, you can see to the exact specifications there, the length, the width, all the appurtenances and everything. And in the front part of this temple, there is a it's walled off, and there's a small door. And this is the Holy of Holies. Nobody goes in there except the high priest, and he does it once a year, and he does it as part of the ceremony of Yom Kippur. They have to tie a rope around his leg to pull him out in case he should die in there. This is the temple itself has got all kinds of other rooms in here along the side. No pews. There's not pews in here, but there are rooms in here. This is where the treasury was, for instance. And there were, and the temple would be a place, the worship events happened outside the temple on the front stoop, because that's where the altar was. And so you have the temple proper, and there's a wall around the temple that you enter. And outside this wall, there's this broad temple complex that is used for all kinds of things. But when you go into worship, there is the altar, and that's where all the worship events happen. Now, there's a thing about temples in the ancient world. You go into them, and all kinds of things can happen. Show you here. Now, I'm going to give you some illustrations of what can happen when you go into the temple. This is the tent of the meeting. It's in Exodus 33. Moses used to take the tent and pitch it outside the camp, far off from the camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when Moses entered the tent, the pillar of cloud would descend and stand at the entrance of the tent, and the Lord would speak with Moses while Moses was in the tent.
The pillar of cloud
There's a cloud.
to conceal it.
In this particular case, the cloud is outside the tent, and there's a pillar of cloud standing at the entrance. But this notion of a cloud being associated and light being associated with the presence of God, and you can go in there and God will speak to you. Okay, how does that happen? Now this is for Moses, right? This is Moses. Later, what they had was a sanctuary there, and this is 1 Samuel 3. Now, when this was before the temple was built, the people of Israel went into the land, and they had a sanctuary at Shiloh. This is where the judges, everybody would come. One tribe a year would come and tend the sanctuary. This is where Phineas and his was the priest there.
And where was the Ark of the Covenant?
That's where the Ark of the Covenant was. The Ark of the Covenant was placed in this sanctuary. And the last priest before Samuel was Eli. And Samuel went to this, to Shiloh, to this tabernacle, to the sanctuary, and the Lord called, and he went in, and he called it a temple here. And he went in where the ark was, and then the Lord called Samuel, and he said, "Here I am," and he ran to Eli. And Eli finally said, "Hey, go lie down, and if he calls you, you shall say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening.'" So Samuel went and lay down in this place, and God spoke to him. Now, we've seen an earlier place where actually the woman with the mother of Samuel went in and slept and had a dream. It's called a dormition. This kind of event that happens when you go into the temple and you can meditate and you pray and even sleep. This happens in temples all over the world. And God would somehow talk to you, somehow speak to you. And dreams were frequent in this, or visions. This is, let me come down here. This is the temple in 1 Kings, whoops. 1 Kings 8. Now, what happens in the first part of Kings is that Solomon finishes his rather bloody accession to the throne. He was not the senior child, and it was not pretty. But Solomon was given the duty, the opportunity to build the temple, and he did. In the first 10 chapters of 1 Kings, most of it is filled with Solomon's building the temple and having and all the measurements, et cetera, and then he comes to dedicate the temple. The priest, and he brought in the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord to its place in the inner sanctum, in the Holy of Holies, and the cherubim spread out their wings. Now, understand that in temples all over the world, there were images of the gods. The folks, the priests, one of the duties of the priests was to take care of that image. And they would literally wash it and paint it sometimes, and they would take care of it. And they would regularly, every year, in most cases, they would pick this image up and carry it out the temple and take it around for people to see. In Egypt, there was a place at Heliopolis. From a temple, there was a kind of a broad avenue down to another location where the god would be taken out. This is not uncommon today. You see this, well, if you have Roman Catholic background, there are times when they would take the statue of the Virgin Mary and take her out and carry her around on the streets and stuff. This was common. This was not the case, however, in the temple in Jerusalem. No image. No image. What you had here was the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant had on top of it two sphinxes kind of creatures. One on one side and one on the other, facing each other, and their wings went up and they came like this over top. And God was understood. If he had a locus, it was between the tips of those wings. Yeah, if you go look it up, and I should have done this on Google it, it's called the Ark of the Covenant. You'll see this thing with the wings.
Were the tablets in the ark?
And technically, Moses says to put the words of the law and the tablets of the 10 Commandments were in that Ark of the Covenant. So, and then and then the priest came out of the holy place. A cloud filled the house of the Lord, so that the priests could not stand to minister because of the cloud. For the glory of the Lord filled the house of the Lord. And then Solomon said, the Lord has said he would dwell in thick darkness. I have built you an exalted house, a place for you to dwell in forever. All right? Yeah. First of all, this glory, the kavod, Yahweh, is seen in terms of smoke. It's the smoke of the altar, etc. Frequently, there would be incense used in the temple, so that there would be smoke in the temple, etc. And you understand now that when you sacrifice something on the fire, God's smelling the sacrifice. God's coming. So, now what was happening here with this presentation of the ark in the temple and the glory of the Lord residing there, and the combination of that and Solomon, you have the merger of two theological traditions that merge by this time in Israel. First is the covenant with David. This is in 2 Samuel 7, when David and Samuel and the prophet says to Samuel, brings them together, And God gives David promises that he would be on the throne forever. Right? It's the major monarchical covenant in the time of in this period of Israelite history. And the thing that makes a difference between Samaria to the north and Judah to the south is Judah always has a Davidite on the throne. Samaria, they have all kinds of coups and stuff like this. They have all kinds of different families on the throne. So there's this Davidic theology. And then there's the other thing. This presence of God here in the temple in Jerusalem forever. It's these two kind of parallel notions of theology that become the warp and the woof of the theology of Judah. Theology of Judah. The northern kingdom is a little different. In Samaria, it's a little different. In Judah, for instance, you always have to go to the temple to worship properly, and you always have to have a Davidite, child of David, as the king. In the north, the kings are selected by council, by the leaders of the people. So when they didn't, well, even when there was a coup, they had to have concurrence of all the leaders. Yes.
When did the people of Judah consider themselves chosen? Was this the time?
When did the people of Judah consider themselves chosen? Well, there were the people of Israel considered themselves, the whole people considered themselves chosen from the time of Abraham and particularly the Exodus. When the kingdom split about 940 or so, both of them considered themselves to have worshiped gods and therefore selected by God. The survivors were Judah. See? So this notion of the chosen people comes down to us through the Bible, through the tradition of Judah. The northern traditions evaporated. So they considered themselves chosen from the very beginning. Yes.
Did Judah consider themselves more religious, more connected to God?
Oh, absolutely,
than
because
Samaritans?
they worshipped in Jerusalem. The great sin of Jeroboam that they could not, that no king could be, no king could get away from, was that they worshipped in Bethel and in Dan. They worshipped in the wrong spot, wrong denomination. It's kind of like Methodist. Yes.
I had a question when I was reading this, where it talks about people not being able to see or not be able to understand. I
I'll
was
get to that.
confused by
Me
that.
too.
I'll get to that.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
critical stuff.
Okay.
This holy, verse 3. And he called to one, the seraph said, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of thy glory, thy glory, of his glory. We sang that this morning during the communion. This seraph song, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, heaven and earth is full of glory, thy glory. Glory be to thee, O Lord Most High. This is familiar to us all because this is embedded in Christian liturgies from the very beginning. And it comes from here. It's a powerful, first of all, it's marvelous poetry. And we can see down here in verse 4, it filled with smoke. And then down here on verse 6, and one of the seraphs flew to me, holding a live coal. And it had been taken from the altar with a pair of tongs. And he touched his tongue, and that cleansed his mouth so that his mouth could hold these holy words. And he was, actually, there's kind of it says, Your sin is blotted out, your guilt is departed. So Isaiah has been cleansed by fire. This, if you look at the windows in the sanctuary on the left-hand side, all the way to the front, at the top panel, you'll see a little round red thing with black lines in it. That used to, I don't know whether it's still called, that used to be called the rose window, because it looks like a rose, but it's not. It's a coal, and there's it said tongs, right above it there are tongs. This is the coal that cleansed Isaiah's mouth. You can see it, it's in the top panel. Then he says, whom shall I send and who will go for us? This notion of us is twofold. First of all, the ordinary word for God in the Hebrew, the shortest part is El, as in Israel, but the name that is attributed to God is Elohim. That's plural. Right? So frequently God comes out as plural. Second is if you read Psalm 82, you can see that God has a council that he consults with all the time. So this is a plural God in this sense. It's not that God is not one. It's just the form of the language, and there's a sense sometimes of God meeting together with his advisors. And then he said, go and say to this people, keep listening but do not comprehend. Keep looking but do not understand. Make the mind of this people dull, stop their ears, shut their eyes, so that they may not look with their eyes and listen with their ears and comprehend with their minds and turn to be healed. And that's powerful. Now, let's talk about this for a second. First of all, you got to know that this passage occurs in every one of the synoptic gospels. Jesus says, that's the, get back here. Get down here. Jesus says it in all of the gospels, synoptic gospels, and so it's important. It's important for the church.
What does it mean?
Does it mean we're not supposed to evangelize?
Or does it mean we have to shut off all this other outside senses in order to understand?
Okay, let me read you about the remnant. Here's 1 Kings 17. Whoever escapes from the sword of Hazael, Jehu shall kill. And yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal. This is Ahab and Jezebel, and this is Elijah fighting. He's gone down to Horeb, and he's in a cave, and God walks in front of him, speaks with a still small voice, and he says, I'm going to bring it all down to Ahab and Jezebel, but there's going to be somebody left. Isaiah 7. This is in the next chapter. Then the Lord said to Isaiah, go to meet Ahaz. It's one of the kings. We'll get to him later. And your son, Shear-Jashub. This means that is a remnant shall return. That's the name. That's how you translate this name. It's a symbolic, metaphoric name that he gives his child. At the end of the conduit at the upper pool at the fuller's field, and say to them, take heed, be quiet, do not fear, do not let your heart faint, because these two smoldering stones and firebrands because of the fierce anger of Rezin and the son of Remaliah. So here, Ahaz is being attacked by the north, by Samaria and Syria together, and God is saying, a remnant is going to remain. Judgment's going to come down on you, but something is going to remain afterwards. Here's what it says in Matthew 13. Exactly the same thing. Why do you speak in parables? And you see it here. Indeed, you will listen but never understand. You will indeed look but never perceive, etc. And then his disciples said to him, "And to you has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom, but I speak in there in parables, so that looking they may not perceive and understand." Okay, here's the thing, folks. There is a tradition. Ostensibly, this is the first oracle of Isaiah. Right at the beginning, right after he received his call. And this is the call. He said, "Go and preach judgment."
Who said that?
Isaiah, this is what we see. Keep listening to see here. He said, "Go and say this to the people."
God.
And then goes on, keep on listening and do not comprehend, etc. This is exactly what we see in the New Testament. Let's continue with this. I want to point out, incidentally, there's a marvelous poetic motif here. See where it says in verse 10, make the mind of the people dull, and then stop the ears and shut their eyes. And then down here, so that they may not look with their eyes, listen with their ears, comprehend with their minds. Right? That's chiasmus. As you see, A, B, C, C, B, A.
But what does it mean? Right, what?
Let me finish.
I was getting there.
Down
Seems
here
like
it
the
says
opposite of
in
what we
verse
should be
10,
instructed.
Building the suspense.
"How long, O Lord?" And he said, "Until the cities lie waste, without inhabitant, and the houses without people, and the land is utterly desolate, until the Lord sends everyone far away, and vast is the emptiness in the midst of the land." Right? This is a picture of what's going to happen. A judgment that's coming. It comes with the Assyrians in the north. It comes to the whole land. Judah is made vassal in the south, and eventually we see this, of course, with the Babylonians who take them in Judah into exile. So everybody's gone. This is what it says. This is what the judgment's coming on the people. Verse
What is
13. Verse 13.
Wait.
And even if a tenth part remain in it, it will be burned again, like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains standing. When it is felled, the holy seed is its stump. Here is a word of hope.
Barely.
Barely. Barely. But this is the motif that we're going to see. It occurs in all of the prophets, for all of them. Listen, God's going to judge us. Now understand, at this particular time, this is about 740 BC, 200 years or so after the temple was built. It's what 200 years ago, the Constitution was written in this country. You know, we've come away from the Constitution a little bit, from the original intent of it. And indeed, there are judges who want to go back to that original wording only, just as there are folks who want to go back to the original wording of the Bible, the literalists. But we've come a long way. And these folks have come a long way from the traditions, particularly the traditions of the prophets. And we'll get to that a little bit later. So they've come a long way, and there's judgment, but there's hope. There's a remnant.
But I'm so sorry. I don't see where the judgment is, unless I'm just reading it incorrectly. Is it when he says, keep listening, but do not comprehend, is he saying, you will keep listening and you're not gonna comprehend?
Or you should keep listening and not
What is
understand.
being said
What
there?
are they, what is actually being said?
Keep
here?
listening, but do not
Is that a
comprehend.
command?
What does that
Pardon me?
mean?
Is that a command?
Yeah.
Like, do this, keep
Yeah.
listening,
Yeah,
but
but-
don't you understand?
Because
but-
if don't try to understand,
Well, this is
What does
part,
it-
this is part, I think this was
Predestination.
brought into the New Testament for that very reason. It's a statement
Nobody gets
that
it.
you cannot expect everyone to respond.
but why is that judgment? That doesn't sound like judgment.
The judgment is down here. Until the cities lie in waste.
What until? What's until?
How long?
They can't
How long we
understand.
don't listen?
How long will we
They
listen?
can't understand
to
until it's
understand.
all gone. When it's all
Oh.
gone, they'll figure it out.
How long are you stupid? I mean,
Okay.
how long will you be stupid? I like the Isaiah would say, how long? I mean.
How long will we
A
know
long
this
time.
democracy is gone when we have anarchy? How long will it take us to realize we no longer have democracy?
Well,
So
how long are
basically,
we gonna suffer?
but basically, yes, so it sounds like this is, yeah, okay.
See, this is the only way to make sense of this, that this is the pattern. Judgment.
Make the mind of this people dull. That would be terrible.
Oh,
It's,
reality.
there's no other explanation for people not hearing this word, except that they have been made stupid.
So God did that?
Yes,
God is, you understand that God is in control of everything.
Right.
Oh.
Through Isaiah, he's telling.
we still got free will, but
I still have a question.
Please speak up.
So, you told us before, prophets speak to kings.
Yes,
So I guess my first question is, but God isn't saying, go to the king and say this.
yes, he
He's
is.
saying, go to the people and say this.
That's right.
So I guess my first question is, does he do that?
Yeah,
Is there some part in Kings or somewhere where Isaiah goes into the temple and says, keep listening, but don't understand? And does that ever happen? Or are we
Yeah,
supposed to
probably
assume
yes.
from this that he did do it?
the prophets spoke where they could speak, but they were ordinarily called to speak to the people in charge.
So I guess my next thought is if somebody walked in our church and said this, a lot of us would be saying, uh-oh, we must be missing something really important.
Did you ever read the book In His Steps? In His Steps was written in the 1920s and was one of the best-selling novels in this country. Sheldon, Sidney Sheldon is.
I remember the name.
Here's a nice prim church, and during Sunday morning, one day, one of the, a poor man walks down the center of the aisle and says, you folks have not paid any attention to me. I've asked for help, yada, yada, and just lays it out on him and falls over dead. Right? And this is what sparks the pastor to determine that this church is going to, from now on, do what Jesus said. So the subtitle of this is In His Steps, What Would Jesus Do? And it is a fantasy. It's not real, but you know, the ideal is that what would Jesus do? You see people even putting it on wristbands today. What would Jesus do? The truth is that it's hard to explain why we can't hear.
Yeah, and Jesus used these words in his ministry, exactly. You are not going to understand.
And there's a guy named Henry Frankfurt wrote a book in 2005 on bullshit. He's a philosopher. And it's a nifty little book. It's only about 60 pages. It's really an essay on BS, what it is. And basically he says that BS is not a lie. BS is something that somebody says without regard to the truth. Person who's saying doesn't care whether it's true or not. But he does care if you believe him. And so there's been a lot of research done on that. There's going to be a lot of research done on it still. The question is how is BS so persuasive?
The bigger the lie, the easier it is to
Lie.
believe.
One of the books I'm reading now is talks about motivational BS. That is where he talks about bullability, not gullibility, but bullability, susceptibility to BS. And there's motivational bullability, where what we're hearing is reinforces what we want to happen and want to believe. And there's this urge within us to accept evidence, to accept bull, even if the evidence is against it, if we like what it says. That's it's talk about a scientific explanation for it. That's as close as I can come to it, except that God is seen as in control of everything, and the major message of the prophets is judgment. So to say to people, you didn't do right. Why didn't you do right? The other half of that message, consistent through the prophets, into the New Testament, is some will survive. Some will survive this judgment, which is fully righteous. And that's a message of hope, folks. That message of hope, even if a remnant just revives, a remnant will remain, a righteous remnant. That's the message of hope that drills right through all the prophets, and it is part of the warp and woof of the message of the gospel. But it doesn't take away the judgment. We don't want the judgment part. We would like to say we're doing just right. And well, that's where I think personally, that's where you're in jeopardy. The moment we say we're just fine is a moment where that's why I say we need to pay as much attention to the confession on Sunday morning as we do to the sermon. We've got to start with that. Personally. Yes.
Another question. So did you say that Isaiah first sort of rejected this call from God, and then, because he does say, here I am, send me.
Yeah, he does.
So is that because of what the seraph
Right,
did? It
verse
took his
5.
guilt away?
I am a man of unclean lips, and I'm among people. He was saying that I'm not worthy.
Okay, and but then the
Moses
seraph,
specifically said it, and Jeremiah did.
and then the seraph took all his guilt away. So maybe then he became more clean.
It seems like it's some redemptive
Yeah,
right there.
here I am, send me. Okay. And
So the
then,
notion of this coal, fiery coal of cleansing
yeah,
is powerful.
Are there sects?
Pardon me?
Have there been sects?
Yes.
Throughout the ages that have used this literally?
Coal in the map, there
Yeah.
probably have been, but I don't know. of
I
any
just
specific.
wondered if in the literature that was.
People can tend to take things literally, pick up snakes and do that kind of thing. So I don't know specifically of one that talks about taking the burning coal in the mouth. There are folks in various religions and some in Christianity who will use some kind of pain infliction, flagellation, self-flagellation. Okay, folks, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so sounds like the anti-vaxxers.